Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. What if I told you there is an investment that will make the GDP per capita go from this to this, where the GDP per capita has substantially increased, and that this investment will result in a savings of $1.62 trillion in healthcare, and a savings of over $1 trillion in agricultural production costs, and a savings of over $530 billion in land management, and that it'll double the income of 545 million small-scale farmers, all the while keeping greenhouse gas emissions for agriculture below the Paris Agreement commitment. But that passing on this investment would cost us, the global community, 5% of the global GDP, which is the equivalent of $3.5 trillion a year, or $500 per person. This investment also creates opportunities and will result in more resilient supply chains, more stable economies and currencies, and more talented human capital, and opportunities to invest in frontier markets. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm calling out to you today to make an investment today that stabilizes tomorrow and ensures that you can be the drivers of the opportunities of the future. This investment is in food security, which means it's also an investment in women, children, education, social protection, and rural infrastructure. And remember the graph we showed you. The simulation was based on an increase of dietary energy supplies, or what we would call calories. So what I'm presenting to you today is an opportunity to invest in an organization that was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2020. This organization, which recently rehabilitated over 1.5 million hectares of land and provided over $2.1 billion in cash transfers for social protections last year, and which supports over 100 million people a year with life-saving and life-changing assistance, which is including over 50% of this number are women and children. Let's take a look more closely. This year, 30 million people need just 45 cents for one meal a day. What does this mean? It means $5 billion is needed this year to prevent 30 million people from famine. And what I'm proposing to you today is if you sow the seed fund today, then you can reap the crop in nutritionally, economically, and politically stable countries in the future. And if you'd like to know more and be a part of this journey, I implore you to get in touch with the World Food Program right here today. And with that, allow me to introduce you to the Executive Director of the World Food Program, David Beasley.
Your Royal Highness, ladies and gentlemen, in 1970, Dr. Norman Borlaug, known as the father of the Green Revolution, was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. And at that time he said, man can and must prevent the tragedy of famine in the future, instead of merely trying with pious regret to salvage the human wreckage of the famine as he has so often done in the past. My question to you is, in those 50 years, how much have we learned and how much have we accomplished to fulfill his dream to prevent the tragedy of famine? Well, we are about to find out. Famine is at humanity's doorstep because of conflict, because of COVID-19, and because of climate change. Those three trends have created a perfect storm of humanitarian disaster, not in one or just two isolated places, but truly on a global scale. Today, as I speak, 270 million people are marching toward the brink of starvation. That's up from 135 million just a year ago, and I'm not talking about people just going to bed hungry. I'm talking about people marching toward starvation. And within that, over 30 million people in 36 countries will die if they don't continue to get the food support that they receive from the World Food Program that we provide right now. They literally depend on us for their survival. 30 million people. And we support over 100 million people. But here's the tragic reality. Because of COVID and the global economic crisis it has caused, right at the moment when our need for funding is the greatest, our access to traditional government funds are the least. So we must turn to the private sector instead. And we're asking you to be a part of helping us save humanity. We have this brief window of opportunity to prevent a devastating global famine before it closes its grip around the throats of millions of people around the world. The price tag for just famine relief alone is $5 billion. but the return on the investment is beyond huge. Millions of lives saved, thousands of forced migrations stopped so people can stay home, dozens of nations and regions that will not be destabilized but remain orderly. We know that hunger breeds conflict and destabilization, which in turn breeds extremism and forced migration. It's a vicious cycle of suffering which keeps on drawing more people in. Today, around 80 million people are living as refugees or internally displaced people after being forced to flee from their homes due to conflict, the highest total since World War II. Innocent children, women, and men who had to leave everything behind and run for their lives. The human and economic costs of this devastation are colossal, around $333 billion alone just in the year 2019. So, isn't it worth investing $5 billion to prevent such misery and slash the bill? Ultimately, we will all have to pay. I truly believe it's the best bargain you'll ever be offered and the smartest investment you'll ever make. A wise person once said, the most expensive peace is still cheaper than the cheapest war. It's time for us to do the right thing. If we don't, we will pay a far, far higher price, more wars, more destabilization, more forced migration, and more famines. It doesn't have to be that way. We have the solution. The best vaccine against chaos is food. The Norwegian Nobel Committee recognized that at the World Food Program that we know our work, we have the expertise to tackle this challenge, and we keep our promises. So let's act together today. Let's fulfill Borlaug's 50-year-old challenge and come together as one united humanity and invest so that we can prevent massive famine in our time.
Good evening again, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to include you today on a discussion about redefining leadership for the post-COVID era. Now, like most of you, I'm very anxious to get over this COVID lockdown, but the reality is the world will not come out of it at either an equal rate or at the same speed. And in this moment of time, we have highlights and opportunities to rise above the average leadership mindset. We also have opportunities to hack the system. And today we have 4 of the most amazing leaders who can help guide us through this conversation. Ms. Lubna Olayan, who's the chairman and executive committee of Olayan Financing Company and the chair of the Saudi British Bank. We have with us Senator and former Prime Minister of Italy, Matteo Renzi. We have with us Jeffrey Ubben, founder and managing partner of Inclusive Capital Partners, and Jean Lemierre, chairman of BNP Paribas, France. Each of you has shown leadership throughout the days, but what has challenged us throughout COVID, I'm sure, has shaken the systems of not only your personal lives, but your business lives. Today, we have representatives of both leadership in policymakers and business leaders. And Lubna, I'd love to start with you and ask you, what have you viewed as the changes that leadership must have through this COVID era that can carry us through to the post-COVID era?
Thank you very much, Princess Reema. COVID has highlighted the urgent need for us to collectively reassess and reevaluate our relationship with the planet and with one another across borders and generations. Despite the flack they often get, millennials serve a very important role as my generation conscious, something I can attest to as the mother of 3 millennial daughters. As we've coined it, this is the moment for the Great Reset. The problems we face, ranging from unemployment, inequality, climate crisis, and the increased spread of disease, are all connected. None of them are new problems, but what is new is how they have been amplified by this pandemic. Looking at the wealth gap, for example, in the US in the last 40 years, we've seen CEO total compensation increase more than 1,000% as compared to a 12% increase for average worker. And 2020 saw a wealth gain for many individuals in the billions of dollars, while working families were not only having to navigate the pandemic itself, but also losing their jobs, access to health care, and home. The statistics speak for themselves. On the basic human levels, we all recognize that this is an issue unjust and unacceptable. Governments cannot resolve these problems on their own. The solution rests in the collaboration and cooperation of the business community, government, as well as international institutions and academic and scientific centers of excellence. We know that cooperation works. Just look at how quickly the vaccine was done through collaboration and in record time. COVID forced us to really rethink ourselves as the global community that we are. None of us can be safe unless we all are. So we must work together in a global level and across sectoral basis. What is needed is inspired leadership, sustainable business practices, and full accountability and transparency. Strong leaders have to be agile and adaptable, possess strong communication skills, and be guided by an unwavering moral compass and a sense of purpose. Paul Polman exhibited just that sort of leadership when he introduced sustainability as an important feature of Unilever's business, and when pressured in 2017 to put short-term revenue growth to the forefront instead, resisted that pressure. He was even bold enough to assert that business must have a purpose beyond just making money. That's leadership. COVID highlighted the importance for leaders to demonstrate resiliency, innovative thinking. Our world requires it. We have a saying in Arabic, Al-Haja al-Ikhtira. Need is the mother of innovation. That is certainly the case right now. ESG serves for us as a great example of innovative thinking. So it is incumbent upon the business community to accelerate and expand its commitment to implement ESG best policies and practices. ESG directly responds to these issues we face globally and underscores the importance of collaboration and cooperation. It's good for business, and it's obviously good for society and environment as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lubna.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jeffrey, I'd love to ask you, what do you see as the highest priorities, picking up on what Lubna mentioned for us, for both global CEOs and policymakers in the post-COVID world?
It's an honor to be here, Your Royal Highness. I'll give you a bit of a front row seat that I've had, and it follows on what Lubna just talked about real quickly. Over 25 years, I've served on 20 public company boards as a shareholder director, and I have been complicit in meetings that talked very little or not at all about the health of the employee, the customer, the community health, or certainly the environment. This is a failing of capitalism in America, for sure, and COVID has made it worse. Companies have lost place, and globalization has been an accelerant, whereby we can do this race to the bottom to find the cheapest labor and perhaps the dirtiest technology. I'm finding, and I believe, that purpose and place can be rediscovered and reestablished by these companies. I think perhaps the best way to do that is to go local. That is place. Right. I guess the technical word would be in-source, with things like food, energy, including repurposing waste to energy, infrastructure, education. I think that is what fair paying jobs are that will create a certain level of productivity that then allows wages to be increased. I actually think, as I listened to the Crown Prince today talking about good demand pulling good supply, I actually think that is the essence of Vision 2030, which is to go local and assert place in your strategy as a country.
Amazing. So, Jean, I'd love to ask you, with this idea, which is quite tangible, this go local, we can see the immediate impact and effect of that, particularly through COVID, where we can no longer travel and we can't engage. But we're still interconnected, and international institutions still have a strong place to play and a role to play. How do you see international institutions and regulatory frameworks evolving over the next year to capitalize on the good that's happened through COVID, but also pick up on the cracks, and how do we mend this?
Well, good to be with you, even if it is from Paris. I'm sure you see the Eiffel Tower. I share what has been said. We have been living in a global world, but we need to get the best out of it. And one of the lessons of COVID is local. In the future, being able to combine in a clever way the global value and the local value is crucial. If you allow me, I can give you an example of this. BNP Paribas has a big project under the leadership of PRIF in Saudi Arabia, for which we are building a joint custodian service for clients, mixing the skills of Saudi Arabia and global financial places. Putting together the skills is not easy, but can be done. And I'm sure in that case will deliver a lot of value. I have taken this example because that's what we need to do and to grow in the future. Local has been the protection of people. And people will never forget that during the crisis, they have received support, health, protection from their government. So the way to combine the two is probably the best approach. Regulation does allow this. Of course, we urge a lot of regulators to team up, to speak to each other, to allow this type of processes, but it can be done. It can be worked out quite easily when you want to do it. And it has a lot to do, probably, with another lesson of the COVID, which is that you need long-term vision, the way we speak about, but today matters. We need to deliver day after day value for the people at the local level. If they do not get value, I do not say understand value, but receive value, they don't stick to policies which are needed to prepare the future. It's a long race. The post-COVID time will be a long race for recovery and improvement, but we need to be absolutely sure that people receive value during that race day after day. Otherwise, they will not run the race. And probably that's my last point on the COVID crisis. The other big lesson for the business is that innovation and science matter a lot. What do we speak about? Today we meet together because of telecom system, e-system. And of course, we are expecting vaccine. We know that health is based on science and capacity to treat people and to save people. And of course, what is behind this is education. Education for everybody, education for all parts of societies, based on science and technology, and preparing once more value for the future. That's probably the best way to combine the few lessons of the crisis. Because at the end of the day, of course, I agree with Mrs. Olayan, the leadership is about creating opportunities, creating growth in a sustainable way, and of course, corporate responsibility, social responsibility, environmental responsibility are key words for us. So yes, there are big lessons. The world will be different tomorrow, but there are lessons we can make. And we try to make them step by step with governments.
Wonderful. With that, Prime Minister Matteo Renzi, you played many roles in government, from mayor to prime minister, and now you also work and consult with the private sector. What do you view as the opportunities between collaboration for businesses, governments, and non-governmental organizations? And what is the future? You'll be our final speaker today, so should we be hopeful or should we be pragmatic?
Your Highness, thank you so much. Thank you so much to Jeffrey, Jan, and of course to my friend Lubna. It's a great honor to be again with you. I think that the leadership after COVID, it's a very complicated thing because the relation between government and business in that period are totally stressed. Please think about a political leader, a politician. He was totally in crisis, first of all, for education, because we have a problem with the young students. No one in Europe understand what could happen after the crisis of COVID in our next generation in terms of lack of school, in terms of lack of presence in the education field. Second, the leader today have to combine between rules very strict to contain the spread and the contagion, and at the same time try to guarantee a great investment in new sector to create jobs, guarantee situation of the people who lost the job, and at the same time try to give some incentives to create new ways for the future of the world, because the pandemic is a stress who really could create an unbelievable new world. So the first problem for a politician is what type of combination between the day-by-day problem with a great vision. And in that, it's very important the role of business and not-profit organization and the new world. Why? Because that it's a easy period. Easy in that moment, yes. Easy because it's a time to create from greenfield. There is an expression in Latin word is Felix. Felix now means in Italian felice. The translation is happy, but real Felix means a time in which it's possible to create a lot of things. So I believe, and I know there is no time to continue our discussion, that it's a great period to try to create totally a new world. But we need to combine together the day-by-day strategy, not easy, particularly for businessmen, particularly for the people involved in finance, in the private sector, and a vision for the next 20, 30 years. So what is the great point for everyone is that, in my humble vision, stress of pandemic should create a new ranking in the history of the humanity and in the relation between countries and government. The real challenge now is create a vision. And in that vision, it's impossible for a government, for a politician to have a vision without a good cooperation with business and with the philosophy, with the people involved in the social in the civil society. For that, my view is exactly that. In this time, the cooperation between businessmen, politicians, and all the sectors of a human community, it's not simply an opportunity, it's a duty. Because that time is the time of create a new hope for the future of the world. We will be more focused on the hope, on the pragmatism. I don't know. I think without hope, there is not a day-by-day strategy. Without day-by-day strategy, but without vision, we cannot really create a new world. So I'm really excited because after pandemic, in the history, we created in every time of the season of the life, a lot of opportunities opportunities. Think about my city. Plague created the Renaissance. After plague, we created the Renaissance in Florence and in Italy. I hope after pandemic, we will create a new world in which businessmen, politicians, and the people of the civil society could invent a new world for a new generation of human beings.
Thank you so much, sir. And ladies and gentlemen, if you'd allow me to take just an extra 30 seconds, because nothing would give me more pleasure than to close out the FII with the voice of a woman. Lubna Olayan, could you give us a 15-second, 20 if you like, closing statement for the end of the FII?
Well, thank you. I just want to say it is COVID, as all the panelists have said, was a rude awakening for us all. And we shouldn't let any crisis go to waste. While mourning the loss of over 2 million lives so far, we cannot, without marking a moment for us to see how we can change the world. And we have to call for an action, as everyone has said, a real action to see how we can start a new beginning from this. And as I said, I'd like to leave a message for the millennials, and which I said they are the voice of our conscience. And I would urge them not to fall in the trap that many of us from my generation fell into, that age or that characteristics of greed, selfishness, and arrogance. I think you should stay true to your values and try to build a society that everyone benefits from across. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your participation, and thank you for joining us today. Good night, ladies and gentlemen.